The following episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television. Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. Here's today's lesson plan. Bernie disses Joe's record. Bernie disses Elizabeth's healthcare plan. Why we should be Bernie or Bust. So let's get started.
I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid. I meant Veterans Benefit. I meant every single solitary thing.
Bernie Sanders was on CNN with Anderson Cooper, where finally, he went after Joe Biden's electability. And as I'm going to get to later, he also discussed Elizabeth Warren's healthcare plan. But first, let's get to Bernie's thoughts on Joe Biden and his electability.
You said recently about Vice President Biden, his record, you said to the Washington Post, quote, is just a lot of baggage that Joe takes into a campaign, which isn't going to create energy and excitement. Is there something specifically you were referring to in terms of baggage?
Sure. I mean, look, Joe and I are friends, and I truly like Joe. But what is imperative is that we defeat Trump, the most dangerous president in modern history. And that means you're going to have a huge voter turnout. You're going to have to get working people excited. You're going to have to get young people excited. Joe Biden voted and helped lead the effort for the war in Iraq, the most dangerous foreign policy blunder in the modern history of this country. Joe Biden voted for the disastrous trade agreements like NAFTA and permanent normal trade relations with China, which cost us millions of jobs. Do you think that's going to play well in Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania? You know, Joe Biden has been on the floor of the Senate talking about the need to cut Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. Joe Biden pushed a bankruptcy bill, which has caused enormous financial problems for working families. So if we're going to beat Trump, we need turnout. And to get turnout, you need energy and excitement. And I just don't think that kind of record is going to bring forth the energy that we need to defeat Trump.
So finally,
Bernie pulls the trigger, drops the hammer, disses Joe's record. Now, let's diss Elizabeth's healthcare plan.
Senator Elizabeth Warren was asked by Jake Tapper yesterday why she believes her Medicare for All transition plan is better than yours. I want to play her response so that you have an opportunity to respond to that.
It gets the most help to the most people the quickest possible. Help starts on day one. And then it's full health care coverage for 135 million people to be able to opt into it at absolutely no cost.
So do you think this is unrealistic?
We can do that on a 50 vote. We can do that on a 50 vote budget reconciliation and get help to people. Let people experience it.
Does her plan, in your opinion, get the most help to the most people the quickest possible?
I think my plan makes a lot more sense. And this is why. For 100 years, Anderson, from Teddy Roosevelt on, we have been talking about the need for health care for all. But as I think everybody understands, the reason we are not doing that, the reason why we have 87 million people uninsured and underinsured, why we spend twice as much per capita as the people of any other country, and why the healthcare industry last year made $100 billion, they have the power. They dictate. They and the drug companies dictate what happens.
Don't forget that. They have the power. This is the point I want to make when he's done, is that Elizabeth is being paid not to get anything done. She can have all the plans she wants, but she's being paid by her donors, by her billionaire donors, by her daughter in healthcare industry, not to get anything done. So Bernie brings the power to actually achieve it. Whether you like Elizabeth's plans or not, she won't bring any power to bear to achieve it. She would alienate her donor base if she did.
What happens in healthcare? When I win, or at least when I hope I win,
you'll win.
We will have the momentum in this country to finally tell the drug companies who are charging us by far the highest prices in the world, the insurance companies who are ripping us off, that finally, we are going to move to a Medicare for all single-payer system with millions of people standing up and demanding that. Our program, my legislation, is a 4-year transition period. And the first year, we expand Medicare to cover hearing aids, dental care, eyeglasses, and home health care. And we lower the eligibility age from 65 to 55. That's in the first year. I think there will be massive support for that idea. And the next year, it's 45, 35, and in 4 years, everybody is in. That is the easiest way to bring universal health care to all Americans.
So Bernie makes some great points here, but I'm going to make the larger point that he didn't make here. That having this two-piece plan that Elizabeth Warren has, where in the first year you pass a public option, and then 3 years later, right before the next election, you somehow pass Medicare for all. What this does is divide the healthcare fight into two big political fights. And it gives private healthcare interests a 3-year window to ramp up their fight against Medicare for all. So under a public option, the way Elizabeth Warren's laying it out, her first initial move is a public option. Okay, let's say that gets passed, even though that will take just as much of a political fight as Medicare for all will. Let's say she passes a public option in the first year.
Not going to happen.
Private insurance interests now have 3 years to offset sick people onto the public system, drain the public system of resources, turn around 3 years later and say, look at that, I guess Medicare for all is not going to work because we just helped to drain the public system of resources and act like that's what Medicare for all would be like under a Medicare for all system, when it would not be.
This is not simply ineptitude. This is evil. This is contrived. This is planned. This is carefully calculated evil. You think Joe Biden is more evil than Elizabeth Warren? You think Donald Trump is more evil than Elizabeth Warren? No, this is sneaky. Donald Trump is in your face. He's fucking evil. But Elizabeth Warren is sneakily evil.
Medicare for all is a single-payer system. Everybody in the same pool. Everybody pays in, which also means you have complete freedom when it comes to choice of doctor, provider. I mean, I as a Canadian understand this. Under a single-payer system that does not operate the same way as a public option does. So there's this idea out there that, well, a public option is better than nothing. A public option, all it would do is allow private interests to then try and make the case why a Medicare for all system would not work by doing what I just said exactly. By putting the sick people onto the public system, draining the public system of resources, and acting like that's what Medicare for all would be like.
And that's why Elizabeth's daughter is on board with Elizabeth's plan, because it wouldn't actually change anything. The public option would keep all the health insurance people ripping us off. So Bernie wants to get to the root of the problem.
It is horrible strategy. So on top of the fact that that aspect of it is poor strategy, it also just separates this healthcare fight into two political fights that you don't need to have. I mean, this idea that, Congress is going to fight you any less if it's a public option is crazy. You're going to have the healthcare fight regardless. You might as well make it the big one. You might as well make it a singular fight and have a giant movement of people behind you that Bernie Sanders has. So this is also what separates Bernie Sanders from Elizabeth Warren, is the giant movement behind him. This is a political movement that will be required to pass anything big like Medicare for all. It will require political pressure. So you need that movement in order to get any of this change. And Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden, nobody else has that political movement, has that kind of an engaged support base that Bernie Sanders has.
The last point David makes is that it will take a big grassroots movement to push the new legislation through. Bernie has it. Elizabeth not only does not have it, she is being paid by the health insurance industry via her daughter not to get her plans achieved, ever. She will then say, as other incrementalists say, we did the best we could under the current conditions. The gridlock, they love gridlock because it covers them from doing anything that their donors would not like. They'll say, oh, it's the Republicans' fault that we couldn't get this done. And that's exactly what Elizabeth's billionaire dollar donors want. They are deathly afraid of Bernie because he'll put them out of business. they'll pretend not to want Elizabeth, but her money, her dark money, her bundled money is going to come into her from those sources, and she will be beholden to them. And so if you're really wanting to change the horrible system that Kathy Copeland Padden is about to describe, then you can't vote for Elizabeth. I have been saying that you're an elitist, privileged asshole if you vote for Joe Biden. Well, you're an elitist, privileged asshole if you vote for Elizabeth Warren in the primaries. Or Joe in the primaries. And then if you're not willing, like Kathy is, to say, and you can shove your corporate candidate, I'm not going to vote for your corporate candidate in the general, I'll stay home, or I'll vote third party, or some wild and crazy people will even vote directly for Donald Trump, and a lot of them live in swing states. So you're not going to get Elizabeth Warren even if you vote for her. You're not going to get Joe Biden even if you vote for him. But even the fact that you want to vote for them says something pretty terrible about you. All right, now why we should be Bernie or bust. Bernie or bust. It's not just a clever slogan. Kathy Copeland Padden. You should all be following Kathy Copeland Padden. You should be hitting this button on your Medium page. Medium.com. Way back in 2015, when we were all a bit younger and maybe a tad less jaded, a philosophy shared by millions was given a name and a home base. Bernie or bust. Revolt Against Plutocracy is the parent organization of Bernie or Bust. Co-founded by Victor Tiffany and Patrick Walker, Bernie or Bust took on a life of its own last time, but it's been on the QT this time, and so Kathy is helping us to get the word out this time. She makes the point that the reason it caught fire last time is because of the corruption in the Democratic National Committee. And so that's what we're going to remind you of this time. It's just as corrupt this time. Bernie or bust. Remember, we were going to write Bernie in or vote third party if the DNC did us wrong. And we did. But in retrospect, the write-in option was sorely lacking punch in the face of individual state election laws. True. And can anyone recall how the Hillbots equated us with 3-year-olds holding their breath until their demands were met? Good times. But we soldiered on. Bernie may have lost, but hey, Clinton didn't win. Always look for that silver lining. Kathy isn't mentioning it, but in the Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the reason Clinton didn't win is because many of Bernie's supporters voted directly for Donald Trump. And statistically, we can prove that that alone is why Hillary didn't win. But hey, Clinton didn't win. Always look for that silver lining. I admit I was a bit naive in the aftermath of the 2016 election and have a terrible habit of giving people far more credit than they deserve. So I harbored hope that the DNC and the Dem rank and file would heed the hard lessons they should have learned from the unparalleled foobar they created. The corruption exposed during the Democratic primaries was hardly the work of criminal masterminds, and if you read the WikiLeaks emails instead of illogically screaming about Russia, it's crystal clear what happened and who was behind it. The Moscow stole it narrative is a fancy version of the dog ate my homework for a dismal, dollar-drenched Democratic Party that abandoned the working class and the causes of peace, social justice, and environmental sustainability long ago. Paul Street. Thank you, Paul Street. The Democratic Party asserts that, as a private corporation, they are not bound by their own charter. They reserve the right to handpick the candidate of their, meaning the plutocracy's, choosing. In a nutshell, Democrats freely admit their primary process is just political theater, and yet they never hesitate to strong-arm both Green New Deal Democrats and independent progressives. The will of the people is very far down on the DNC list of concerns. They expect voters, all voters, not just their party members, to content themselves with whatever talking head neoliberal corporatists they throw our way. The nicest thing they say when we refuse to comply with Vote Blue no matter who is that we're too policy-oriented. Like that's even a thing. The most amazing aspect of this behavior is that establishment Dems issue their demands without a hint of irony. Self-awareness isn't their strong suit. Bernie or busters were considered beneath contempt by limousine libs. The pantsuit brigade even told us point blank they didn't need our stinking votes to win the election, yet still blame us for Hilsey's loss to a gelatinous orange turd. Here is a message I got from Darren Oakes in this wonderful time that she's reminiscing about. And you are a perfect example of a willfully ignorant propaganda spewing troll. And take your responsibility for Trump. That's all on you and your ilk. There was nothing wrong with the Democratic Party until Sanders ran his fucking mouth. You don't deserve our party. Get the fuck out. We don't need weak-minded conspiracy theorists in it anyway, you pathetic, lying piece of shit. I responded, it's your bed. I'm going to show this to the prominent Dem Enter folks to let them know that there really is no hope in trying to work with corrupt rank-and-file diehard Dem cheerleaders. Good, you fucktwit. Let your friends know that the Democratic Party isn't going to roll over and let trash like you take it over. The Dems are a lost cause. There is no soul there. So that's the attitude that she was talking about from the diehard Democrats. Hypocrisy! Thy name is Democrat. And ever since then, all we've heard is Russian, Putin, Russia in the biggest display of politically induced mass hysteria since the last Red Scare in the late 40s, early 50s. A little golden book. Everyone I disagree with is a mindless bot or deplorable white trash. A child's guide to online political discussion. Not surprisingly, in the wake of 2016's shameful clusterfuck, the Bernie or Bust movement grew exponentially. I predict that it's going to happen again. Witnessing the blatant corruption of the Democratic Party during the primaries and beyond opened millions of sleepy eyes. It's interesting to note the differences between the progressive Bernie or Bust philosophy and the establishment Democrat vote blue no matter who battle cry. The former is a statement of intent, stressing the autonomy of independent voters, while the latter is a presumptuous admonition to vote for whatever neoliberal corporate puppet the DNC thrusts upon us, whether we are party members or not. Nope, not happening. Of all the lessons the DNC refused to heed post-2016, their belief that they are entitled to anyone's vote who's not a card-carrying Republican is the most mind-bogglingly arrogant and self-defeating. I feel like a broken record here, but rejecting the GOP does not in any way imply affinity with the Democratic Party. Far from it. Establishment Dems have a hard time grasping that over 40% of the electorate hold nothing but contempt for both parties. Why? Because most independents have known for years that the only real difference between the two is gay wedding cake. For example, hair-sniffing Joe openly stated he'd happily pick a GOP running mate and advise millions of concerned environmentalists to take their anti-fracking votes elsewhere. He's combative, elitist, and as articulate as Grandpa Simpson, only a lot less funny. Yet this is the best the establishment Dems have to offer. This is why we need to pledge Bernie or bust. The Democratic Party is not entitled to our support and certainly not our votes, especially when the Dems provide Trump with far more assistance than resistance. Iran war. Ding, ding, ding. Declaring ourselves Bernie or bust is the simplest way to drive the point home. The neoliberal assertion that Bernie or bust is a movement born of privilege proves conclusively just how hopelessly clueless they really are. Establishment Dems fail to understand how many of us simply cannot afford another administration courtesy of the evil two-headed monster called Plutocracy. Almost half the country is ill-equipped to deal with a $400 emergency, even while working 2 or 3 jobs. 40,000 people die annually because, simply put, we value corporate profits over human life. The most vulnerable among us are literally having the food taken from their mouths and joining the ranks of the homeless in droves. Then the system responsible for their diminished circumstances blames the victim by outlawing homelessness. Pure evil. This is why we are Bernie or bust. Not necessarily because we personally are hardest hit by government-sanctioned genocide, yet, but because we believe no one should be doomed to an austerity-driven death. A good example of that is people who can't afford their insulin and they ration it and then they die as a result. If we don't commit to looking out for each other, even if you got yours, and this is the point I made to the people who are supporting Joe Biden in the Democratic primaries, if we don't commit to looking out for each other, even if you got yours, this country will deservedly go the way of Imperial Rome. And neo-lib Dems, repeating vote blue no matter who like a mantra while also declaring yourself never Bernie, perfectly sums up why you suck. Listen to yourselves and realize that solidarity and subjugation are 2 very different animals. Okay, so let's review. Our lesson plan was to diss Joe's record, diss Elizabeth's health care plan, contrast Bernie and Elizabeth in terms of the kind of support they can muster to actually bring about the change that needs to happen, and then why we should be Bernie or bust, because this will give us the leverage to insist that Bernie gets the nomination in the primaries. As I've said before, it will be much easier for Bernie to defeat Trump in the general election than to unrig the system that has kept insurgent populists out of the DNC for over 100 years. I was remembering Hubert Humphrey and how the party bosses gave him the nomination, the Democratic nomination, and he hadn't won any primaries. That's the kind of system we've had so far with the Democrats. They pretend that it's democratic, but it is in no way democratic. It hasn't been for a long time. And for us to get our Democratic candidate through their rigged system, we're going to need to use leverage. And Bernie or bust is that leverage. If you're interested, there's still a Bernie or bust pledge out there somewhere, even though we're not even urging people to sign it. But most of all, share the idea that you will, under no circumstances, vote for a corporate Democrat, whether that be Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, or Elizabeth Warren, in the general election, no matter who. The preceding episode can be viewed on the YouTube channel Bernie or Bust Television.